Well, hello. It's been a minute since we've all been together and seen each other and all of that. We all had a blast kind of catching up yesterday and seeing each other's faces and how we've all changed over the last 5 years. Um, and I want to start by just kind of piggybacking on what Jennifer said and thanking Annette and Jennifer and the entire NAHA leadership team for this incredible conference after kind of coming out of what we've had over the last few years, putting all of this together and coordinating the online component and the in-person component and all of that's just phenomenal. So thank you so much for that. And then speaking of the amazing things that the NAHA team does, I'm going to present to you a little bit about where some of your contributions go. We partner with NAHA and have for quite a while, conducting research on problem areas in aromatherapy, really kind of tackling some of these questions that lead to the big arguments in the online Facebook forums or the websites or the comment threads on the blogs and all of that, especially if it's an area where we don't really have clear guidance, where we're using this anecdotal report and that anecdotal report and they conflict. And what do we do? How do we find a way forward where we have something we can generalize to a larger population? And I'm actually really hoping that you're all caffeinated because I'm going to kind of do a 2-for-1. We have a Clary sage study sponsored by NAHA. We also have a aromatherapy with kids study that I tagged on to this because that's also a NAHA study. And I thought it's another one of those controversial areas, giving peppermint to 2-year-olds. I know that's been kind of discussed a little bit already. So we're gonna do 2-for-1. So I'm turning on the fire hose. Do your best. And ask me questions later if you have them. I'll actually try and finish a little early so you can ask questions. But a little background though, I know Jennifer kind of introduced me already, but just to kind of clarify where it is that I come from in terms of how we approach research. My educational background really focuses on research methods, looking at designing those clinical trials, looking at answering some of these tough questions, looking at identifying some of these populations that maybe we don't have a lot of information about. And we actually work with, I know you all know us as Franklin Health Research, but we are actually right smack dab in the middle of a name change. So you'll see us as Nutraceuticals Research Institute or NRI in the future. With different things. Still the same group of people, still the same approach, still the same evidence base with natural products. We've just grown and expanded into another state. So that's going to be our future name. And my disclosures are we do work with the natural products industry. So we do work with industry, conducting clinical trials on aromatherapy products, nutraceuticals, natural skincare products, things like that to help these companies substantiate their claims, and also to help them with formulation. So sometimes we work with companies before a product hits the market to see if it's really where it needs to be, or if it needs to be retooled a little bit before it's launched out into the market. We, as I mentioned, do work a lot with NAHA. That's a partnership that we do at cost. So that's all of y'all's contributions cover the costs of it. Our contributions of time help to make it happen. And we do that because we're really passionate about aromatherapy. And we're really passionate about evidence-based aromatherapy and how we can take these collections of anecdotes and stories that we have and how we can learn from them and grow from them and really push the community forward so that we're achieving even better results, even more effective results, and helping even more people. My personal specialization, that kind of my jam, as I told Laura the other night, is research methodology. I know that we all in 3rd grade did a little science fair project where you counted up this and you counted up that and you see which stack is taller, that one won, that one's the most effective, or that one's the most beneficial. But when we're talking about humans, we are incredibly diverse species. I mean, even just looking around the room at all of the different genetic expressions that we have, hair colors and textures and opinions and personalities and all of these different things, we're all unique. We all have very different eating habits. We all have very different lifestyle habits, sleeping habits. All of that varies and all of that plays a role in whether or not something is effective. So we have to do more than just count this, count that, see which one wins. We have to design methods that really help to figure out exactly what is going to be something that's applicable to everyone and what groups of people will it not be applicable to? Where should we maybe avoid that? And that really helps to just kind of narrow down when we're choosing our oils or our formulations or our doses, all of that. And then the other thing that it does is it improves the quality of research that we have. We do have a lot of research, unfortunately, in the literature, in aromatherapy, in herbalism, that is that kind of third grade approach. And it gives us a really bad reputation. It gives us a really bad name. So we want to really improve that. Another thing that's kind of our jam is outcome measures. And I know this was touched on yesterday. When we talk about outcomes that we're looking for in aromatherapy, these are not the same outcomes that a pharmaceutical company is typically looking to achieve. We're not looking at how we're using essential oils to cure cancer or how we can put them, in to help with some sort of other, intense disease. Most of the conversations we have, and I noticed most of what we talked about yesterday, has to do with mental, emotional health. Has to do with intangibles, things that we can't necessarily see objectively as a third person, things that we have to learn about from the actual person who's experiencing the essential oil. And there are some exceptions to that. Obviously, a objective third party can tell you if this is affecting your blood pressure. But when we talk about something like stress levels, a third party can't tell you if it's improving your stress levels. You're the source of that information. And these patient-reported outcomes are actually being widely used with the FDA, with the drug development process now. If you want to introduce a new drug to the market, you have to also show that these patient-reported outcomes are there as well, that it's not just improving their objective health, but that it's improving overall quality of life. But that's something we've been doing this whole time. So what we do is we help to develop instruments that are specific to that so that when we say this essential oil reduces stress, we can actually back that up scientifically with recognized and valid measures. And then we also focus on underserved populations. We focus on women, children, pregnant women, a lot of the individuals that are taboo. A lot of the ones that regular drug companies don't want to research on, that IRBs don't necessarily make it easy to research on, but also the people that are using natural health, the people that are turning to natural health the most. So that's really our priority. And just a quick recap of what that looks like. A previous project that we did with y'all was the lavender and tea tree issue. That started way back in 2007, I believe. With the whole concept that these oils can introduce prepubertal gynecomastia. And most of us in the aromatherapy world knew this is odd. This doesn't seem to make sense. This doesn't match with our experience. But we didn't have a lot really to put forth in the scientific literature that really says, no, you're wrong. And so that involved basically taking all three of those components I just mentioned, doing research on children, developing a new measurement tool, and utilizing an extensive array of methodology to produce these findings, where basically we took it and looked not just at prepubertal gynecomastia, but we went the whole spectrum of endocrine disorders with children. So we looked at precocious puberty, delayed puberty, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because if you want to know more about it, last convention, 2 years ago. 15, 2000. That's where you can find it. So get those recordings, you'll find the whole thing. I presented it then. But the highlights are bolded there. Basically, what we did was we used scientific methods to establish with 3 separate papers in the literature that no, this is not the case at all. And we looked at growth hormone deficiency, hypothyroidism, and then, of course, the overall odds of endocrine disruption. And what you really kind of just want to skim there is that bottom line. The odds of pediatric endocrine disorders for children exposed to lavender and or tea tree oils versus those unexposed is 1,001. And that's actually rounded up. There's actually more zeros in there, but that's just the way you present it. It's not exactly 1, but that's about as close to the same odds as you can get. 1-to-1 odds are about as good as you can get. So there was basically no connection. And so this put something in the literature to say there is no connection here. And so that's the type of project that Annette and I like to get on the phone and say, this is a problem. What can we do about it? How can we solve it? And so that's what led us to looking at Clary sage and looking at essential oils with young children. And one of the reasons in particular that Clary sage was important is because women, especially pregnant women, are using a lot of essential oils. As professional aromatherapists, you may not be the ones guiding them through that process or making the recommendations, but that's even worse because they're self-prescribing, they're self-diagnosing, they're finding something on the internet, and they're using them in whatever dose, with whatever oil, whatever quality oil, all of these unknowns thrown in there. And we need to know how to provide better guidance to help these individuals, especially when it comes to controversial topics like Clary sage. So a little bit of history about women in research as a whole. Last time in 2018, I talked about the body of scientific knowledge as being kind of a big bubble, and how the purpose of a scientific study was not to enhance all of that, but that it's to just poke one little part of that out, to answer one little question and give us one little piece of knowledge. Well, when you do that over several decades, then you get, hot topics, you get popular topics, smoking cessation, cancer. There's a lot of money in those. And so you get a lot of researchers pushing that part of the body of knowledge out. And what happens is it develops these big craters where people are neglecting to push these other aspects of the body of knowledge out. And research on women is a huge crater in the overall body of knowledge. And one of the reasons for that goes all the way back to thalidomide. And in 1977, the FDA basically said, don't research on women, just don't. It does not matter if their male partner has a vasectomy. It does not matter if there's no chance of pregnancy whatsoever, just don't. We'll research on men, we'll generalize it to women. That'll probably work. And, and that's what we did. So as you can imagine, it didn't work. So this is a kind of just a quick timeline of attempt at a course correction. Starting in 1986, they established a policy encouraging researchers to include women, which did nothing. They then issued a memo. So they're getting really serious now. Then they investigate and they find this policy wasn't really communicated well, and it wasn't implemented. Who could have guessed? So then in 91, as a result of that, they started a women's health initiative. And then it wasn't until 93 that inclusion of women in research became a federal law, which to some of you might sound like a long time ago, but y'all, it is not a long time ago. That is very, very recent. And so not only did it take that long to include women, but what that means is that for decades, all of that research that was exclusively on men, that was an important era that we lost. All of the knowledge generated during that time. So women weren't kind of just starting as equals now as, okay, well, federal law says you got to include women. Let's do this. Women were starting at a deficit because we didn't have the benefit of all of that knowledge that had been generated during that time. And so shocker, it's leading to harm in women, which plays a huge role in why we do what we do today. Because when 8 out of 10 drugs removed from the market in a 3-year span were removed because they hurt women specifically because of that lack of research, then you combine that with the fact that our women are less likely to be heard or to feel heard at their care provider's office. That's why they're turning to us. That's why they're looking for alternatives. They're looking for something that's safer. They're looking for someone that will listen to their complaints. We talked about that just this morning at the breakfast table, how you can come in and, and there's a joke even with women, and it's, a woman can come in bleeding with a broken ankle and it's very clearly a problem. And they'll say, all right, when was your last menstrual period? Have you tried losing weight? And there's kind of just the standard that they go through before they fix your ankle or whatever it might be. And so this is why people are coming to us. And so what that means is that when we are conducting research on our natural products, we've got to continue to be the answer and the solution that they're not getting elsewhere. So that's why it's so important that we prioritize women. And then I mentioned that we're kind of piggybacking a second study on here. The second one is children in research. And that's another one that's been taboo for a long time. And they're actually further behind than women are. because for so many years, we approach children as just, they're physically smaller adults. If it works on adults, we'll dose down, give it to kids, and that's fine. Again, same thing. You've got all of these organ systems developing, all of this critical development taking place. It's obviously not fine, and it's not helping children. So the NIH is working on inclusion of children policies. These are even newer than their inclusion of women policies. But as it stands today, if you have NIH money that you're using for research, if you don't want to include women, if you don't want to include children, you better have a very compelling reason for not including them. And it can't just be, I don't want to deal with hormones, or I don't want to deal with the extra consent issues. It's got to be an actual valid scientific reason for excluding them, which means that in the natural health community, when we're conducting research, these are the people that we really need to be focusing on. These are the people that have been left out of research, but these are also the people that are coming to us the most. In fact, when NHANES data, which is a government study that they do every couple of years, it tells us a lot about the general public. The purpose of it is to actually identify public health needs that need to be met, but that information is really useful for a lot of other things. When we look at who's using natural products, females much higher than males, which, look around the room, we knew this. And then what's really important to look at here is prevalence was highest among those aged 2 to 5 years, with over 40% of them using some sort of natural products. Yet when's the last time you heard of a study conducted on kids 2 to 5 years old with an essential oil, with a supplement, with anything? And then age 6 to 12, and then it kind of decreases a little bit as they get older, which anyone who's raised kids knows that's kind of how it works. So with that, that sort of background, knowing that that was our passion, then when Annette and I first started talking about Clary sage and pregnancy, as you can imagine, I'm just chomping at the bit. I mean, we are all over it. Let's do this. Let's look at this. Because if you start looking up Clary sage essential oil and pregnancy, if you just Google that, the first 10 results you get are going to be dramatically conflicting. It's going to be, this is going to kill you and it's going to kill your baby. And then it's going to be, this is going to give you the best childbirth and labor you've ever seen. And just the two of them right there together next to each other. And it's hotly contested in aromatherapy forums. I know you've all seen it. It's a big conversation and a big discussion. But what we don't have is solid scientific evidence, taking all of these different anecdotal stories, putting them together and looking at it to say, okay, what is actually the answer here? So Jennifer already kind of in her introduction mentioned this, and so I'm not going to belabor the point, but we all know of Clary sage as kind of being the woman's oil. That's kind of its nickname when we introduce it usually. And we've got these claims that it induces labor. We've got some guidelines saying, you know, if you are going to have a bottle of Clary sage open in a room, you need to kick all pregnant women out first. And then we've got midwives and doulas who keep it in their toolkit as though it's better than Pitocin and it's just going to pop that baby out in a couple of seconds. And obviously everything in between. But nothing scientifically showing us what we can do. What does it do? Is it okay if you stay in the room and someone else opens a bottle of Clary sage? All of that kind of stuff. So what we did was we conducted a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial, and this is still an ongoing study. Because what we're looking at here is we're looking at the entire third trimester. So when women come into the study, they come in their second trimester typically. And that's when we sit down and go through the instructions with them and talk about exactly what it is that we're doing and what we're looking at. And we, for this particular study, are using otherwise healthy women. So not high-risk pregnancies. We're not looking at anyone that might have some sort of other problem that appears that would be unrelated to the oil. We're looking at healthy women, the ones most likely to be told to use or not to use Clary sage oil. And we had them using it the entire third trimester. So the whole rule about don't look at Clary sage before your full term, right out the window. As soon as they hit 26 weeks, we had them using it. And because your sense of smell is heightened during pregnancy, and because it's one of those oils that a lot of people love, a lot of people hate, and we didn't want to have bias introduced to the data just from the smell or the preference, then we had them actually take 5 drops and apply it to their inner thighs. That way we've still got thin skin, so with great absorption. But if they don't like the smell, then they can layer up and it kind of masks it and it helps to keep compliance up. And so far we haven't had anyone drop out because they didn't like the smell. We had a couple people saying I didn't love it, but they kept going. And we had them do this all the way to week 37. So all the way up to when they were full term. We collected data from them throughout the entire process. And then after they gave birth, then we also got all of their birth data. So when did they go into labor? Did they go into labor on their own, or, was it induced? Did they have interventions? We got everything from APGAR scores of the baby, the weight of the baby. I mean, the list of information we got, basically everything that the doctor writes down when you're giving birth was something that we collected and are collecting and included in this. But obviously the primary outcome that we're looking at is this claim that it's going to induce labor, that it's going to put you into preterm labor, or that it's going to somehow adversely affect your hormones, or, harm your baby, or as some online advocates say, kill you and your baby. It's always fun conducting those studies and hearing the feedback. And then also we looked at hormone levels. So we did collect hormone levels in both groups at week 26 and at week 37, so that we had that to look at as well. Basically, we looked at 90% power for this with an alpha of 0.05. What all of that means essentially is we wanted to really make sure that we didn't get any false positives or false negatives here. When we're looking at excluding an outcome, then statistically that's just a little bit more complex than if you're looking at showing something might potentially be better. And it just means the trial needs to be designed a little bit different, and the power analysis is a little bit different. But you have to be careful that you're not just accidentally collecting a few anecdotes and then going, look, these 3 people were fine, it's fine. You have to really make sure that you're getting that correct. So that's basically what that says there. So here's what we have so far. No difference between groups on anything. Not one adverse event, not one early labor or any complication. There's normal variety, obviously, because, women give birth and all of that looks different. And, some people go early, some people go late, but there's nothing that's different between the groups other than that natural variety. And again, I mentioned we've had a couple of women say, I don't really like the smell, but that's the closest to an adverse event that we've had, is just, I didn't like doing this and I can't wait till it's over. It didn't send a single person into labor, not even with daily application for the entire 3rd trimester. So it's not a magical induction tool, but also it's not harming women. It is possible that what we will find as we continue going is that it does help improve, specifically where we might be seeing a signal in the early data, is when women do go into labor, in terms of going past dates and needing to be induced, and then the length of especially that 1st and 2nd stage of labor. It does appear to be helping with that. I can't say that with certainty yet, because again, with the power analysis, we needed all the participants before we can say that with absolute certainty. But it is looking like that is a signal that we're seeing in the data, but we'll get there. But yeah, in terms of, are we baby killers? Thankfully, no. Okay, so moving on, essential oil inhalation in young children. So this is another one of those baby killer accusations that you get online if you're, using especially peppermint, eucalyptus, any of those oils in young children. I know that's another big kind of hotly contested topic. Can we safely use these? Are you going to send your child to the hospital? I know at one point when it was a really popular topic, I had a woman call me frantic that she had accidentally put eucalyptus in a cleaning blend. Does she need to take her toddler to the hospital? And given what we learned yesterday about mental health and stress, when we use these fear-mongering tactics with people about essential oils, it's not harmless. If a little one is not doing okay and we've just stressed out the mom, so she's not able to think clearly, she's not able to take care of her little one, that actually harms health. And that's one of the first things, that we learn in the medical community, the public health community, research community, whatever background that might be, is it's not neutral. If we're giving out bad information, if we're scaring people, that stress has a ripple effect throughout the body, and that's going to impact whether or not we're actually getting better. So essential oil inhalation in young children is an issue that I'm particularly passionate about for that reason. So what we did is little boys and little girls, ages 2 to 6 years old. Looking specifically at that age group that is underserved, but that is also using a lot of natural products, that hasn't really been studied too much in the literature, at least not in the natural products literature. There are some studies on kids these ages with over-the-counter drugs. Some of those include chemicals from essential oils. To participate, each child had to have a respiratory event. And basically what that was, we did not distinguish between if they had, COVID versus RSV versus a common cold versus allergies. Any respiratory event, if they had 2 or more symptoms, counted. And the reason for that is that's how moms are doing this in the real world. Another big passion of ours is actually looking at that real world data. We like to be if you take the bench to bedside approach and you've got like the chemistry and all of that down here, we're on the very end of that right before bedside. We like to look at those real world outcomes. What does this actually mean for the mom that's standing in the health food store, staring at the options? What practicalities can she take away from this? So we wanted to mimic that exact experience with this study. And then the other thing is that we all know natural products are best when we use them right at the beginning. So what we did was we actually recruited over 200 moms and sent them packets to keep on hand. So they had all their instructions, they had all their informed consent. When we're working with children, the children also have to, it's called assent, but basically agree to participate in the research as well. All of that ahead of time. So they had this kind of packet waiting. And if their child had 2 respiratory symptoms, then they were able to pull it out and use it immediately. So we got them right there at the beginning of it. Here is what we used. And it actually just dawned on me, if you want to know the specific formulation and percentages, I did not put that on there and I don't have it on the top of my head. But you can email me and I'll get that to you. But I mean, we just went all out, peppermint, eucalyptus, and then threw in some stuff just to kind of soften it really, since we're talking about young children, so that they would enjoy it a little bit more. And then what we had them do is we had just a, regular inhaler stick like we make all the time, the little aromatherapy lipstick things. And we had it in a sealed package. So they only had it on their shelves for a couple of weeks. During this, it was a very intense time period that they used it to keep it fresh. And they would hold it, the instructions were 1 to 2 inches away from their child's nose for 1 minute, and then repeat that every hour for 6 more hours. So there were 7 total exposures. And we took information at the beginning of that, and then at the end of that total 6-hour period with 7 exposures, because it kind of bookended that. And one of the reasons we did that as well is because, again, we're talking about young children. So we're not wanting to go all out. We still are using safety and having safety guide us through this, but we're looking at practical, realistic ways that we can take these and see beneficial results. So what we looked at here was incidence and severity of respiratory symptoms. So we had 2 separate primary variables, basically how many symptoms did they have? And there were 19 different symptoms that we evaluated. Just as a yes, no, was it present or was it not? Did they have watery eyes? Were they sneezing? Just yes, no. And then for each of those, we also looked at the severity of it, basically on a 0 to 6 scale, in terms of how much they were sneezing. Was it once or was it, nonstop, constant? So we could look at the reduction of symptoms as well as the elimination of symptoms during this time period. We also looked at mood, because we can't really look at anything that happens with aromatherapy and not look at how it's affecting mental health. So because of that stress connection, because of how all of that's tied together, even if we don't see an objective reduction in those symptoms, if it improves their mood, we know that that's inevitably going to lead to improved health outcomes because of the way the body works, essentially. Both of those scales that we looked at were developed specifically for use with children and specifically for use in the natural products industry. So we're not looking at disease scales that were developed, by pharmaceutical industries so that they can put a drug on the market. We're looking specifically at things that are designed to capture whether or not people using natural health products are improving. So here's our sample size. And the original goal was 56 total participants and 120 individuals. It was so popular. I mentioned earlier that we had 200 people. We have a large group of interested participants in our research. Carrie's magic at the peopling, making sure basically that the people that participate in our research are engaged, they're excited about it, that they're also following the instructions and all of the different components that are involved with people participating in research. So we sent out one email for this, and by the end of the day, we had 200. So we kind of cut it off there, and we had a few upset people, but we thought, we've got 200, why not? So we ended up with 200, and we ended up with more than 56 people that actually got sick. We timed this kind of right at the end of the winter season last year. So that's how we managed to get so many sick kids. And I will say it's always funny in the office when we're doing kind of our Monday updates and we're counting how many kids got sick during the previous week. And our public health brains are like, oh, I hope that this wave is over and people aren't getting sick anymore. But also I hope we need like this many more kids to get sick this week so we can get our data. But I hope that, everyone's healthy. So it's some weird conversations. But anyway, this is how all of that was analyzed. Just a little bit of what we found. This is the one of the bigger results that we found. So to make sense of that, 7 and 8, actually unblind you if any of your kids were in this study. 8 was the active participants and 7 was the placebo participants. 0 means they did not have itchy eyes. 1 means they did have itchy eyes after the intervention. So only 3 of the 33 kids who had the active inhaler had itchy eyes at the end of it, whereas 10 of the 35 kids with the placebo did. And we saw that pretty much across the spectrum with just about every outcome we looked at. This one is sneezing. Obviously, they're all having respiratory events. So the numbers are a little higher. It didn't make sneezing completely go away. But you see that it's about half in the kids that did have the peppermint eucalyptus blend. About half of them were no longer sneezing at the end of the intervention, whereas the overwhelming majority of the kids that had the placebo were still sneezing at the end of it. And then these are a couple of other ones. Shortness of breath and body aches. We only had 1 kid still experiencing that symptom at the end of it who had the active, whereas we had 4 in the other group, which I was kind of joking with Carrie this morning. Depending on how we present those statistics, 4 times as many kids were sick. Or we can be honest and say this is what the entire thing looked like. And then post-nasal drip, again, we only had 7 with the kids that had the peppermint eucalyptus blend, whereas we had 13 in the other group. So we see across the board, no matter what we're looking at, that it was helpful. But my favorite part was, in addition to collecting this objective symptom data, we also, every time we do a study, we like to collect just open-ended data from the participants. So we also have what the kids had to say about it. And because remember, they're 2 to 6 years old. So I thought some of these were adorable. Said it smelled lemony and then orangey at one time. Several of the kids in both groups kept asking to use it again. And then a lot of the moms said that when they had to take it away, then the kids would start like counting down when is the next hour up so we can do this again. Several of the kids described it as smelling spicy. One of them said it smells like Whole Foods. One of them said at first it smells yucky, and then after a while it smells good. None of them didn't like it. There were no negative responses. Spicy was about as close as we got to dislike, and then the one child who at first said mm-mm, and then said, no, you know what, actually, on second thought. And then there were a couple of kids too who were upset when the intervention was over, and they wanted to keep going with it. And then obviously this really little one, I'm running out of smells, mama, because they were counting down how many exposures they were going to have. So not only was it objectively effective in a way that parents like to see, in a way that aromatherapists like to see, it also was really well received by the little ones who were experiencing it. And that's always good, because when they enjoy what they're doing, you get better compliance. So you actually get better results, because it really doesn't matter what all of those charts and p-values and ANOVA tables have to say. If someone doesn't like it and they're not going to use it, you're not going to get those results. So this information is just as important as the p-values and all of those other fun things that we had.